Hello, my name's Chris, and today I'll be looking at the supply curve. Now, I've been a teacher for 27 years, teaching economics, business, and ICT. So hopefully I know what I'm talking about. So the supply curve, and we just move this on. So we're going to look at understanding what the supply curve looks like, understand how to label a supply curve properly, and see what can cause the supply curve to shift left and right. So moving on, supply is the amount of good or service a producer is willing or able to provide to the market at a given price. That given price is important. Some producers can't produce at certain price levels, which gives us the shape of the supply curve. So let's have a look at what the supply curve looks like. So here we have the axis, X and the Y axis. Draw these quite large. If you're in an exam, you should use about probably a third or half a page to draw your diagrams. Don't draw your diagrams small. These help you illustrate your answers, and that's where you're going to maximize your marks. So how do we label these axes? The bottom axis will be quantity of the goods, and you could have units look on there if you wanted to, but we're just drawing diagrams here to illustrate points, so we're not going to have quantities precisely in there. And on the left-hand side, on the y-axis, price. So drawing in the supply curve like so. Now you'll notice it's a straight line. For AS Economics, drawing a straight line is perfectly fine. So we draw a straight line for the supply curve. We notice how we're labeling the supply curve at the top right-hand side, not at the bottom left. Top right, that's the convention. Try to remember that. Use a ruler. Make sure you use a ruler at all times. Draw things nice and straight. It makes your life easier, and it makes marking it for the examiner far easier. So why does it slope from left to right upwards? Well, the reason being, as I've said before, is if we just add those things in, price and quantity, producers have different levels of efficiency. So some producers are really efficient at producing goods, and they're quite happy to supply the market down at a low level price. I'll just draw this in, and we just get that in there. Select that and draw in here. So we could have a lower price down here, and there will be a producer that would quite happily supply the goods at that price, because they're very efficient at producing the goods. As the price rises, we get more and more suppliers who are willing to produce at that price. So the less efficient ones, so the ones that got older equipment, less skilled workers, they will jump into the market as the price rises, because at that point they can still make some money after producing the good. So the lower end here is where the most efficient producers will sit, and at the higher end is the least efficient producers. So let me just clear that, clear all my drawings. So an extension on the curve. So as price changes, so if I draw in here, as my price rises, and we get, oh, I should be drawing a straight line really, shouldn't I? Let me clear my drawings, and I'll add those in with a straight line. Let's draw a straight line across. As the price rises, we can see that rather than shifting the curve extends. So there's our extension upwards. Price rises, more suppliers are able to join the market, because they don't need to be as efficient to produce at that price and still make some money for themselves. So they can extend the supply curve by jumping to the market and adding things. So for instance, things like face masks over the pandemic can be, you know, we had lots of people that could produce them at the start of the pandemic, and as time went by, lots of people realized there was shortages of face masks and the prices were rising. They could put into production face masks and make those face masks. Same with sanitizer. You saw a lot of companies switching from manufacturing alcohol to manufacturing sanitizer as they saw the demand for that product rising and therefore cashing in on the price rises as well. So that's an extension of the curve. Contraction, if the price goes down for any reason, so if I P1, I'll draw my line in here. So across from P1, go down to the quantity and we can see how producers leave the market as prices fall because they just can't compete on that price level. So they have to leave the market and they won't produce goods because there's no point in producing goods if they're not going to make a profit. So there's that contraction of the curve with movement along it like that from P to P1. So that's if the price falls. So what can cause a shift? Not contraction or extension, a shift. Actually moving that curve around. Weather, changes in legislation, discovery of new resources or of a sort or new source of raw materials, changes in technology, producer cartels, natural disasters and war. So what do I mean by shift in the curve? Well, I'm just going to draw this quickly on here. So we can imagine there's our axis and we've got our supply curve there, and we'll just add in some text here. We'll add our S in there. And what we might find, oh, we've jumped on, sorry, is we get a shift in the curve. Now a shift will be parallel to the old supply curve. And I'll just draw in there. And I'll just draw my lines in. Let's choose a different color for the lines. Let's go black. Draw those lines in. So if I draw a line across now, it's not turned black, it doesn't matter. We can see here that the price hasn't changed. But at the bottom, we've got a change from Q1, sorry, from Q. I'll just copy that. Oh, didn't want to copy that. Another text box into there. So we've had a shift from Q. We'll just get that mouse. Come on. It's all going wrong. Just draw that Q1 in again over here. And move it properly. There we go. Just put that there for now to hide that. So we've got price has stayed the same, but quantity has increased from Q to Q1. Now this could be, let's take weather for example, that this is the sales of ice cream. Sorry, the sales of, not the sales, the supply of something like wheat. We've had a really good summer. The sun shone all summer and the wheat's grown nicely and it's shifted supply. The farmers had a bumper harvest and they've moved the supply curve from the left to the right. It hasn't increased their costs because the weather's just been really fantastic. The rain's fallen at the right time, the sun shone, and the wheat has just grown better than normal years, and they've been able to produce more wheat for the same costs, and therefore being able to shift the supply curve to the right and produce more for the same price. Changes in legislation, for example, there we could have a shift to the right on building houses if certain laws are changed, so the planning laws are relaxed to get more houses built. We could find, let's say, more oil in the North Sea and produce more oil at the same price. Changes in technology, so improved production methods, better machinery, again, could shift the supply curve to the right. Changes, producer cartels. So for instance, we talked about oil just a minute ago. If the oil in the Middle East is controlled by an organization called OPEC, and they say how much is produced. So they might think, well, oil prices are high, let's produce more oil, and they'll just turn the taps on the oil pipes and produce more oil, and that will shift the supply curve out to the right. Natural disasters, well, we're going the other way. War, we're going the other way. All right, so again, producer cartels, they could go the other way as well. We could shift from right to left, but more on that in a second. So I'm just going to clear that and move on. So supply curve sort of shifts to the right. Let's have a look at it in more detail now. So we've got our supply curve here. Oh, the mouse has moved things on again. And what we've got is a change in circumstances. So it could be the good weather for the farmers. We move that out to the right. We add in our second label, and we can then extend our line. Let me just format this so we can try and get a different color. Okay, let's draw the line and format the line now. So the price is not changing here. The price that they're getting is exactly the same, but for some reason, their costs have gone down. So because their costs have gone down, oh, the lines changed color now, there we go, that's better. They have been able to supply more goods at the same price. So that has shifted the supply curve to the right. As I say, it could be that the weather's been good. It could be that they've improved the way they produce things, the new technology in production. It could be their workers are better trained, and so they work more productively, and so for the same amount of cost, they can still produce more. So that's a shift to the right. Now, shift to the left, as we said before, could be because we've got some kind of natural disaster happening. So we'll shift to the right, shift to the left, sorry. Price remains the same. So the price remains the same. So our line goes from there to there. And it's just the quantity produced changes. So it could be flooding. It could be, for instance, at the moment after the COVID disaster, people are getting pinged on the app and they can't go to work, so production has to reduce. It could be lorry drivers who get pinged and they can't drive the goods to the market. It could be that there's a shortage in a component that needs to go into making a product. And so supply has to shift to the left, although the price will remain the same. So the quantity is reduced. So we could actually draw an arrow in here to show a movement where we've moved from Q to Q1, a reduction in the quantity being supplied to the market. I'm going to clear that. I'm going to move on. Now, producer surplus. I've already said that suppliers down, if I just draw down an arrow here, suppliers down here can actually afford to produce and sell their products at that lower level. And as prices rise, so as the price rises up that axis, more and more producers can jump in and produce more goods. Now, what we then have is a situation where, if I draw this line across here, all this area in here is what we call the producer surplus. Now, the reason being is if we've got a price for our products at the top here, at P, then this producer down here, who would be willing to produce their goods at PS, he's actually making extra profit on his products all the way up here. This producer at the top, let's say someone's producing right up here, they're not making much money at price P. But someone who can produce down here, so let's say producer A, can actually produce at quite a low cost, and therefore he will make additional profit compared to producers further up the supply line. So this whole area is called the producer surplus. So let's look at some examples, some real world examples. I've already kind of touched on this. Go back a bit. So oil, if we've got the price here, and we've got quantity down here. If we find another source of the oil, perhaps we found extra oil in the same oil well that we've been drilling, or we've got a better method of extraction, which has happened over the years. You know, over the last 40 years or so, they found better and better ways of extracting the oil, and so forth. They get more oil out the same well. So they may have predicted a certain amount out of a well, but because of new technology, they've actually been able to extract far more oil, and therefore they can shift the supply curve across to the right, producing more oil, and therefore we can increase the quantity at the same price. We're going to get more oil. So that's our shift across there. So new technologies, new methods of production can shift that over to there. So for example, in the US, they've had oil prices have shifted because they found new ways of extracting oil from shale. I know it's controversial in this country, but they've extracted oil and gas from shale, and so they've actually been able to shift supply across to the right. So that's oil. So agriculture, again, if we've got farmers who are producing at a certain level, given a certain price, if we have a really bad summer, we might see supply shifting to the left. So really bad wet weather, harvests fail, and I heard on the radio this morning that the supply of champagne will be reduced this year because of the wet weather and the frost that they had in France this year. And so their production of champagne will drop by a third because they just haven't got the grapes this year. And that's through no fault of the farmer, it's just the weather's affected production. They've done everything the same, their costs have been the same, but they've shifted backwards at the same price because of the weather not allowing the grapes to produce properly. components, again, another example from this year, the car manufacturers had real trouble getting computer chips. There's a computer chip shortage. And so their supply of cars has had to be reduced, although their costs have been exactly the same, because they simply cannot get hold of computer chips to put into the cars to control the functions of the car. So although price hasn't changed, so the cars still cost the same, they simply cannot get the components to actually make as many cars as they were making. So that supply curve has shifted to the left, reducing the amount of cars that are being produced. So hopefully now we understand what the supply curve looks like and how we should label the diagrams, understand what can cause the supply curve to shift to the left and the right. Remember, in an exam or when you're writing an essay, draw these diagrams as big as you are able to. Half a page, third of a page, brilliant. Refer to those diagrams in your answer, saying what's happening in the diagram. Don't just draw a diagram and then ignore it in what you're writing up. Make sure you comment about that diagram in your write-up. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed that and you've learned something.